Hey there! If you're watching this, I'm going to assume that you have read through or listened to the first part of House on Mango Street. If you haven't done that, go back and read it or listen to it now. I'm going to talk about it, but I'm not here to read it to you. The first part of the book is all about exposition. If you remember, exposition is where we get to know our characters and setting before we get into the plot and the conflict. I really like the kind of exposition in this book because we learn a lot of things about the world of the book without having to be told explicitly. And the things that we're told are the kinds of things that you can draw a lot of interesting conclusions from. First, the speaker, who we find out later is named Esperanza, tells us about her house. She has to share a bedroom with her sister Nenny. Then, she tells us about the house that she wished she could have, one with maybe a yard or a tree, and without hallway stairs, whatever those are. Then, she tells us about the house that she actually lives in. The way she describes it, she doesn't really describe it. Well, not so much as we know what it looks like, but we get a sense for the kind of place that it is. You know what I mean? Then, she tells us about a conversation that she had with a nun when her family was living at one of the previous addresses. It turns out Esperanza's family has had to move a lot. The nun was in disbelief when Esperanza showed her where she lives. Why do you think that was? And how do you think that made Esperanza feel? The second vignette tells us about what kind of hair every member of her family has. That's kind of weird. She's not telling us much about their personalities. But there might be something we can draw out of it anyway. Her father keeps his hair so short that it stands up. Her brother doesn't need to use a comb, and so he probably doesn't. These are metaphors, very likely, for her family's personalities. We learn the most about her mother's hair. Esperanza tells us about how the smell of her mother's hair makes her feel, and how it makes her feel safe. We can infer from that Esperanza has a good relationship with her mother. It's not the smell of the hair that makes her feel safe, but the association of that smell with her mother, who is a safe, caring person. Then she tells us about climbing into bed with her mother in the middle of the night. That gives us a hint about Esperanza's age. How old were you the last time that you climbed into bed with your parents? I bet it wasn't recent. Most high school students don't do that. Boys and Girls, the next vignette, is where we learn a little bit more about Esperanza's age and level of maturity. She tells us that the boys and the girls stay apart. I guess that's because they all have cooties. Think back to when it was important to you that the girls and the boys stayed apart. How old were you then? We also learn a little bit about what's expected of Esperanza. She tells us that she's responsible for her younger sister Nenny. The inference to make from this is that Esperanza's family expects the older children to care for the younger children. She is given responsibility to be a caretaker at a very young age. We know that she's young because she thinks boys are yucky. Get it? Then she drops a real bomb and tells us that she dreams of one day having a best friend. Well, if you want a best friend, it's safe to guess that you don't already have one. So, Esperanza is lonely. She says that she has a red balloon tied to an anchor, another metaphor. Esperanza is the balloon, and Nenny is the anchor. Her responsibility to her sister is holding her back from whatever it is she wants to do. The last vignette we're going to talk about today is where Esperanza finally tells us her name. I've been using her name already because I've already read the book. I'm a teacher, and it's my job to have already read the book. This vignette is where we really start to get into the themes of identity and gender here. Esperanza is a clearly Hispanic name, and she tells us that her name in English means hope, but in Spanish means sadness and waiting. Stretch that thought out a bit, and it tells us something about how Esperanza feels about her cultural heritage. She also tells us that Mexicans don't like strong women, Her words, not mine. And that's a pretty bold statement for a child to make. Then she tells us about her great-grandmother, and oh man, have we got to talk about great-grandma. Apparently, great-grandma was a strong woman who didn't want to get married. So, some guy came up behind her and threw a potato sack over her head and carried her off and married her. That doesn't sound very, consensual. After that, great-grandma apparently spent her days sadly looking out a window. That's a big symbol in the book. Women who are looking out windows are like caged birds. They're not able to interact with the world outside. They're kept at home, not really supposed to leave. And our Esperanza tells us straight up that she doesn't want to be like great-grandma trapped behind a window. Then she tells us about how native English speakers pronounce the name badly. And she tells us that she's jealous of her sister, whose real name is Magdalena, but she gets to go by Nenny. Esperanza wishes that she had a nickname so that people didn't have to say Esperanza, but she doesn't have one. She's always just Esperanza. She imagines that if she could have a nickname, it would be something like ZZ the X, which is a pretty cool nickname, if you ask me. Spiker the X. Yeah. That's about it for part 1. So here's the assignment for the first part. In a few sentences, tell me how you feel about your home without telling me how you feel about your home. Just like Esperanza showed us how she felt ashamed of her home during that conversation with the nun. You can describe a conversation with someone else, like Esperanza did, or make something else up entirely. Try to write something that communicates a feeling through an experience. Here's an example. Sometimes, I like to just stand here for a few minutes and look around this black void. I do this because it's my black void. There's nothing special about it, but this one belongs to me. I'll walk around from one part of the void to another part of the void and just kind of take it all in. I do this because it's my very own space. It's my black void. So, how do you think I feel about my black void after hearing that? You give it a shot, send it to me, and I'll give you a grade for it. Probably a good grade. Definitely a good grade. Yes. Anyway, that's all for this one. I'll see you later. Bye.